Today at work, I have a new client come in. We're chatting, getting to know each other. Like, what do you do for work? And she tells me she's a pathologist. So I'm like, wow, I bet you have some wild stories. And she's like, you know what, actually, I don't really. You work in the morgue of one of the oldest hospitals in London and you're trying to tell me you don't have any experiences. I don't buy it. After a little while of talking, she's like, well, I do have this one story. I need to know it immediately. She's like, well, at my work, we have a level of professionalism. I work with a lot of scientists, doctors. We're logical people, so the ghost story side of things, it's not that accepted. There is this one story, and it happened when she first started there. The woman that was in charge, so the head coroner, head pathologist, is getting her familiar. She's just finding her feet in her first 2 weeks there. And the head pathologist tells her they have one rule that's not on the books. We won't find it in any rule books, but it's what they do. They've done it for years. It's what the guy who she took over from had always done, and so she had always done it. And that was when they autopsy young girls, they will talk to them before they do anything. They'll be like, hi, my name is, and I'm going to be carrying out an autopsy. Just kind of explain what they're doing. Kate, my client, bear in mind she's been to medical school and this is a bit woo-woo. She's like, what the hell is going on? She's like, yeah, we've always done it. A bit of an odd one, but that's what we do here, so I would ask that you do it too. So she's like, okay, thinking it's almost like pulling her leg because she's the new kid, that kind of vibe. She witnesses her boss Jane doing it, and so after a while it just becomes natural. She starts doing the same whenever they have a young girl come in, you know, she's died suddenly, unexpectedly, very sad. All the pathologists would just follow suit and they would all introduce themselves. After a few years of working there, finally Kate plucks up the courage to ask her boss. They're all out one night, like having birthday drinks for one of the other staff members. Jane explains to her that when she first started in this department, she took over from a guy called Norman. And much like Kate is to Jane now, she was like a pathology assistant. So she was just assisting. And Norman, the guy that worked there, was well known to be quite insular. He wasn't a chatter. It was Norman who had said to Jane in the first place, I've got one rule, is that we respect the dead as if they are alive. We don't talk about ghost nonsense, spirit nonsense. I don't ever want to hear that in my presence. Makes it very clear he doesn't believe in it, doesn't want to know about it. Request is that you speak when a young woman comes in. You always talk her through what you're doing. You never disrespect a woman's body. So she's like, oh, you know, I want to get on the right side of this guy because he's miserable old so-and-so. So in this London hospital, like with loads of other hospitals around the UK, they have lifts specifically for staff so that things like this, crash teams, whatnot, if they need to, they can have their own set of lifts which are only accessible if you've got a staff lanyard. The porters, when somebody would pass on a ward, would pull them first through the corridors of the ward, and then they would use these staff only lifts to go down to the morgue, which were keycard access only. Morgue is exactly the same, so for obvious reasons, they're not just going to let any Tom, Dick and Harry into the morgue, and they need to know exactly who was in there at what time. But back then, in Norman's time, when he first started, it would be like sign in, sign out, and an actual key that you would use to get down there. You'd always have a good idea of who was in there, and it would only be authorised people in there. Norman, being one of those very serious type A kind of guys, was very anal about always having names written down. You know those people, you know? Sheldon from Big Bang Theory, like, everything has to be just so. Every few days, Norman's wife comes down in the staff lifts and goes in, gives Norman his lunch, they chat. And Jane really wonders how a woman like this could be married to a man like that. Bobbed blonde hair, sandy blonde hair, she's well dressed, she's got like the Jackie Onassis type little two-piece suits, and she brings in this cute little lunchbox every day which matches her little two-piece suit. She just wonders how she could be married to a man like that. One day she is getting into the lift and Norman's wife is also in the lift, And she takes one look at Jane and she says, I know he can be a little bit hard, but, you know, he means well. He really does. And he's been treating her. She feels like he absolutely hates her, wants her to get the sack. And Jane's thoughts about Norman absolutely hating her are pretty much confirmed one day when the lights in the morgue start flickering and Norman's like getting really peed off because he does things in record time. Like, he is a man by the number, by the hour. Jane tells him, you know, like, go and take your lunch early and I'll try and get a technician down here to sort the lights out. And Jane thinks, this is my chance to impress him. She's made very good friends with one of the hospital handymans. And so she thinks, if I can go and find Roger to get these lights fixed, I'll like have saved the day and Norman might actually be nice to me, might crack a smile. And just as Roger's finishing up, Norman comes down and he does not look happy. In fact, for a man that looks unhappy all the time, Norman now looks furious. He shouts at Jane, he shouts at Roger, and they both scarper out of that room pretty quick. Later in that day, when Norman's had a chance to calm down, he goes and speaks to her and he says, like, it is authorised personnel down here. You cannot just be inviting random staff members down. I've checked the book and he did not sign in, he did not sign out. Like, this is a sackable offence. And Jane is thinking, brilliant, great. But after she sits there and has a think about it, she's like, why is it okay for Norman to have his wife down here, but it is not okay for me to get somebody who's actually works in the hospital to come down? So when she realises this, she gets a right bee in her bonnet. She takes the book, the morgue book, which has all the names written in it, and she heads upstairs to HR. She presents them with the book and she voices her concerns. And they look at each other funny. Darling, Norman isn't married. And at this point, Jane's even angry because she's like, this isn't even his wife. Like, he's just got some random woman bringing him lunch. As you know, the woman with the blonde bob, the sandy blonde bob, she's well dressed and she brings him lunch all the time. And both the ladies' faces just go pale and are absolutely shocked. Absolutely shocked that Jane has seen who they call Claudia. Back in the 60s, when Norman had first started working there, when he was assisting the head pathologist, a lady had come into the A&E holding her daughter, who had been hit by a car not far away from the hospital on her way to school. And the woman, rather than call an ambulance, had been so distraught that she'd actually just picked her daughter up and run. She was still clutching the little girl's lunchbox when she arrived. And it was very clear to everybody that there was nothing they could do to save this little girl, but she wouldn't have it. The fact she was screaming, do something, do something. Eventually, they took the little girl away. After some hours, they took her away down to the morgue. But somehow the mum had got hold of the keys and she'd gone down to the morgue and she had gone into the room. Norman didn't have the best social skills. He, as I said, he was quite insular. So when the mum had come in, he didn't really know how to handle what she was going through, and she begged and begged and begged and begged, please don't touch her, and begged him to give her daughter's body back. But he obviously wasn't allowed, and the woman had basically said that she was going to curse him and that she hoped that her daughter would haunt him forever. And a few weeks later, all of the hospital staff had seen that the mum had actually herself, because she just couldn't cope with the thought of her daughter not being around anymore. At that point, there had been several sightings of her, but Norman never admitted that he could see her, never acknowledged that he could see her. The only time that he ever acknowledged anything to do with the afterlife was when he spoke to the bodies of the children that he had to autopsy. Filming this in the dark. Definitely not going to sleep tonight.